Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. McCabe. A pleasure to have you here addressing such an important issue. And part of the conversation that we're having, as initiated by the chair, was how the U.S. changes operate in the context of a global challenge. This really is a global tragedy of the commons. We're all sharing the atmosphere on this planet. The gases we put in the atmosphere travel everywhere. And so it's only in the sense that there is an international strategy that we have some sense or some opportunity to take on this issue. But what happens if each nation, and among the nations of the world, India, China, and the U.S. are the major carbon dioxide polluters, if each of those nations says, let's not act until the other two nations act, and then we'll come along later, what happens to the planet in that situation?
Well, this is the dilemma of the tragedy of the commons, Senator. We all have to act. And if everybody says we're not going to act because we don't think anybody else will act, then CO2 emissions will continue to increase. Temperatures will continue to rise. The oceans will get more acidic. We will have more drought. We will have more heat waves. We will have more suffering around the globe and in this country as a result of the impacts on the climate.
Is there some possibility that by the U.S. taking this issue seriously and being engaged in dialogue with really all the nations of the world, but with India and China, that we can accelerate action among all three nations?
We absolutely believe so, Senator, and we believe it's essential for the United States to be asserting and showing leadership.
Sometimes when we look at this, we look at the total carbon dioxide production, but much of the world looks at it in the context of individual footprint, if you will, per capita carbon dioxide. And in that sense, is it the Chinese, or the Indians, or the Americans who have the largest per capita footprint?
I believe it's the United States that has the largest footprint in terms of carbon.
Do you have a sense of the proportion with the other nations?
I don't off the top of my head, Senator. I'd be glad to get that information for you.
Well, if I was to tell you that the footprint here in America is more than 3 times larger than that of China, would that sound like that's in the ballpark?
I think that could well be in the ballpark.
And if I was to tell you that the most recent statistics show that our footprint is 12 times per capita that of India, does that sound about right? It is right. Okay, thank you for confirming that. And so certainly we are benefited, if you will, from utilizing fossil fuels on a scale much larger than individual citizens in China or India. And in some sense, that gives us an obligation to help be leaders in the world in taking this on. Now, China has obligated itself to proceed to, by 2030, produce renewable energy, non-fossil fuel energy, that is equal to the amount of electric energy produced in the United States from all sources as of this moment. Were you aware of that commitment?
Yes.
So that's pretty phenomenal. In other words, all of our fossil fuel energy, from coal, from natural gas, from solar, from wind, all of this combined together, China is going to match that amount with renewable energy in the next 15 years. That's a pretty extraordinary commitment that we didn't have a year previous.
That's correct.
And that commitment came out of a dialogue with China about the need for all the nations of the world to proceed to take on this issue.
That's correct.
But we're all going to suffer if the planet continues on its warming pace.
Yes.
Well, you know, currently we are on a path in which our carbon pollution has gone up to 400 parts per million, up from about 270 for the Industrial Revolution. And the pace has doubled in the last few decades. That is, we were going up about 1 part per million per year on this planet. Now we're at 2 parts per million, which means that within the time that many members who are on this panel are going to serve in the U.S. Senate, we're going to see carbon levels that go on up from 400, where we are now, quite possibly through 450 and higher. And with that comes a global challenge in which we will surpass the point where we have a 50% possibility of keeping temperature rise from under 2 degrees. Is that something we should be concerned about?
We absolutely should be concerned.
And does that help drive the current policy of saying this is why we need to look at the most efficient ways? You've laid out a plan which you're saying basically each state find the most efficient ways to tackle carbon pollution. That makes a lot of sense economically. Now, I'm seeing that carbon pollution is having a huge impact in Oregon. We're seeing our oyster production is faced by the challenge because oysters are having trouble forming their shells because the ocean is 30% more acidic. And if the ocean is 30% more acidic now than before the Industrial Revolution, and oysters are having trouble forming their shell, what else is going wrong in the ocean food chain? Could be a lot more, I imagine.
Right.
And we are having a fire season that is several weeks longer now than it was 20 years ago, which is doing a devastating impact, not to mention the pine beetle, expansion of the pine beetles. That's a big economic issue for our state. We are having substantial droughts, three worst ever droughts in the Klamath Basin in just the last decade and a half. Three worst ever droughts, huge impact on our agricultural base. That's an economic issue. So it isn't just a matter of some theory about some computer model in the future. This is something that's having a huge impact on our economy, on our rural way of life, on our fishing, on our farming, and on our forests right now. Thank you for bringing a plan forward that encourages each state to find the most cost-effective, flexible way of taking on carbon dioxide. That makes a tremendous amount of sense. Each state is going to find a little bit different path. Maybe we're going to learn from each other. Your plan allows partnerships to occur between states as another form of flexibility.
Correct.
Which also makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
So huge flexibility. You laid out these 4 building blocks, but these are basically, here is one set of ways we can get to these numbers, but go find the best way possible for your state.
That's correct. Yep.
Well, I thank you for putting forward a plan that helps put the United States in the leadership role of working with the nations of the world to take on this devastating challenge, a challenge that's having huge economic impact on my state right now, huge impact on rural America right now, and it's the responsibility of our generation to take it on, and of each president who serves in the Oval Office to take it on. Thank you for doing so.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Merkley.